안녕하십니까. 영어 최고인 80일차 연습 시작해 보겠습니다. 네, 오늘은 민족 최대 명절인 설날입니다. 네, 그래서 오늘은 설날 특집으로 어, 오늘 제 본가에 와서 본가에서 촬영을 시작해보겠습니다. 네, 그럼 오늘도 한번 즐겁게 영어 연습해 보겠습니다. 네, 오늘도 마찬가지로 할 영상은 How to Talk Like a Native Speaker라는 영상이고요. 마크 그린이라는 사람이 찍었고 영어 공부를 어떻게 해서 어떻게 해야지 그 원어민처럼 말할 수 있는지에 대해서 얘기를 하고 있습니다. 저도 혹시나 나중에 영어를 잘하게 되면은 이 사람처럼 제가 어떻게 영어를 잘하게 되는지 영어로 설명할 텐데 그런 것들을 상상을 하면서 이 영상을 재밌게 보고 있습니다. 네, 그럼 오늘도 이전과 마찬가지로 한 문장씩 따라서 듣고 따라해 보도록 하겠습니다.
Moscow.
My story starts in Moscow.
I was 15 years old.
I was 15 years old.
My best friend and I, we were part of a group of Westerners
My best friend and I, we were part of a group of Westerners
visiting the Soviet Union.
visiting the Soviet Union.
This was in 1987, a few years before the fall of the communist regime.
This year's, this was in 1987, a few years before the fall of the communist regime.
We were given an official tour guide who
We were given an official tour guide
was assigned to us, and
who was assigned to us then.
the tour would start in the morning.
The tour would start in the morning
Checked into our hotel rooms for the night.
and we were checked into our hotel rooms for the night.
My friend said to me, "Let's go outside and look at the city."
My friend said to me, "Let's go outside and look at the city."
I thought it was a great idea, dumb idea.
I thought it was a great idea, dumb idea.
So we grabbed our coats and we snuck out past security and into the street.
So we grabbed our coats and snuck out past security and into the street.
We found the entrance to the metro.
We found the entrance to the metro. We found the entrance to the metro.
The Moscow underground transportation system is the deepest one in the world.
The Moscow underground transportation system is the deepest one in the world.
The ride down the escalator took a full minute.
The ride on the escalator took a full minute.
Once we were down there, my friend had a right to an open train, and
Once we were down there, my friend had it right on open train, and I
pulled him back. I said, "Wait,
pulled him back and said, "Wait,
let's write down the name of the station so we can find our way back."
let's write down the name of the station so we can find our way back."
So I had a notepad, and I took a notepad and I wrote down the letters of the station. And
So I had a note. So I had a notepad and I took a notepad. I wrote down the name of the station.
we hopped on the train and went some train hopping.
We hopped on the train and went on train hopping.
And that was fun because, well, actually it was weird.
That was fun because actually it was weird.
Were a lot of people, they probably all coming home from work, and
There were a lot of people. They were probably all coming home from work.
they were all dressed in brown and gray clothes, and it looked
They were all dressed in brown and gray clothes.
very, very different from what we were used to. They were all dressed in brown and gray clothes, and it looked very, very different from what we were used to at home.
They were all dressed in brown and gray clothes, and it looked very, very different from what we were used to at home. They were all dressed in brown and gray clothes, and it looked very, very different from what we were used to at home.
But the stations were lovely. There were stations with statues.
But the stations were lovely. There were stations with statue,
with paintings on the wall and glass display.
and with the paintings on the wall and glass display.
It was really like museums.
And, and it was really like a museums.
We would never have expected that, and
We were never ever expect that.
everything was perfectly clean. We would never have expected that, and everything was perfectly clean.
We were never ever expect that, and everything was perfectly clean.
Well, what was weird though is that the people, nobody seemed to speak, and everyone seemed to be looking at us, and it kind of weirded us out. So after about 20, 30 minutes, we had enough, and we wanted to go home.
But what was weird, but was
Really like museum. Well, what was weird though is that the people, nobody seemed to speak,
what was weird though is that the people nobody seemed to.
and everyone seemed to be looking.
What
What was
was
weird
weird
though
though
is that
is
the
the
people,
people
nobody seemed to speak, and everyone seemed
nobody seemed to speak.
to be looking at us. What was weird though is that the people, nobody seemed to speak, and everyone seemed to be looking at us, and it kind of
Everyone seemed to be looking at us. Everyone seemed to be looking at us. What was weird though is that the people nobody seemed to speak. Everyone seemed to be looking at us, and it kind of weirded us out.
weirded us out. So after about 20, 30 minutes,
Weirded us out. So after about 20 minutes,
we had enough, and we wanted to go home.
we had enough and we wanted to go home.
I showed my note to someone, and they directed
What was weird though is that the people nobody seemed to speak. Everyone seemed to be looking at us, and it kind of weirded us out. So after about 20 minutes, we had enough. So and we wanted to go home. What was weird though is that the people nobody seemed to speak. Everyone seemed to be looking at us, and it kind of weirded us out. So after about 20 minutes, we had enough. We had enough and wanted to go home.
we had enough, and we wanted to go home. I showed my note to someone, and they directed me over there, and
I showed my note to someone. They directed me over there.
then over there I showed my note to another person, and they directed us to the other way, and then
Then over there, I showed my note to another person. They directed us another way.
the third person directed us sideways. Other person, and they directed us to the other way, and then a third person directed us sideways.
And then a third person directed me sideways. And then a third person directed me sideways. Directed us sideways.
That was a little confusing.
There's a little
Oh,
confusing.
then I saw it
Then
over the stairs.
then I saw it over the stairs. The sign.
Turned out I
Turned
had
out-
written down the Russian word for exit.
It turned out I had written down the Russian word for exit. Turned down I had written down the Korean word for exit. Turned down I had written down the English word for exit.
So we headed upstairs, and we
So we
found-
headed up the stairs and we
found a taxi.
we
That,
found
was-
a
that was
taxi.
great.
That was
Driver,
great.
you know, into this hotel, and
We told the driver, into this hotel,
he was willing to take us. And I
and he was willing to take us. And
remember sitting next to the driver.
I remember sitting
Handing
next
him
to the
50
driver,
rubles.
handing
He
him
looked at
50
me and he
rubles.
said, Neil,
He looked at me and he said,
to the driver, handing him 50 rubles, and he looked at me and he said,
he
Neil,
looked at me and he said, "Not
dollar.
dollar."
$50, that was like, I don't know, 20 times that amount or something.
$50. I don't know. It was like, I don't know, $50. It was like, I don't know, 20 times that amount or something. 20 times that amount or something.
That was not an option for us, so we had to get out of the taxi, and we drove.
There was not an option for us. We had to get out the taxi. So there was not an option for us. So we had to get out the taxi.
Away, leaving us standing there.
And he drove away, leaving us standing there.
It was a cold night, and
It was cold
you know,
night, and
everything was strange for us. And we were
everything
teenagers,
was
and
strange for us, and we were teenagers.
pretty nervous, didn't know what to do.
We were pretty nervous. Didn't know what to do. Didn't know what to do. Didn't know what to do. We were pretty nervous. We were pretty nervous. Pretty nervous. We didn't know what to do.
We started walking. We walked
We started walking. We walked
the end of the block.
to the end of the
We
block.
turned the corner.
Turned the corner.
And 200
And
yards in
200
front of
yards
us,
in front of us,
the Interest
the
Hotel.
Interest Hotel.
Well,
Well,
this experience affected me in two ways. The first is
The
that
first is that
anytime after this trip,
that I hear anyone speak Russian, I would just cringe.
and the second one is
The
that
second one is that it taught me the importance of understanding the local language when you're traveling,
it actually led to me
and it actually led to
another
me
4 languages
learning another four languages fluently
following years.
over the following years.
Now, before I go on, I'd
Now,
like to
before
know.
I go on, before I go on, I'd like to, I'd like to, I'd like to know in the audience.
Can we have a little bit of light, maybe, in the audience?
Can you have a little bit of light, maybe in the audience? Can you have a little bit of light, maybe in the audience?
Just like to know who's,
I just like to know who's
by show of hands,
By
who is
sh-
not a native English speaker.
by show of hands who's not a native English speaker, who's not a native English speaker, English speaker, English speaker, English speaker, native English speaker, native English speaker, who's not a native English speaker, by show of hands, who's not an English native speaker.
Must be 99%.
It must be 99%.
Anyone who doesn't speak English, stand up.
Anyone who doesn't speak English stand up. English doesn't speak English stand up. Speak English. Doesn't speak English stand up. Anyone who doesn't speak English stand up.
Alright, so I can assume all of you have,
I can assume all of you have,
learning a language.
gone through the process of learning languages.
Anybody who
Anybody who
speaks 3 or
speaks-
more languages?
Anybody who speaks three or more languages, three or more languages.
Wow,
Wow, that was
maybe 70%.
there was maybe 70%. There was maybe 70%.
4 or more languages?
Four or more languages, anyone?
Still quite a bit.
Oh,
Anyone
still
speak
quite a
5
bit.
or more languages?
Anyone speak five or more languages? Anyone speak five or more languages?
Wow, come see
Wow.
me during the break.
Wow, come see me during the break. 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 During the break. Come see me during the break.
Alright, well, to me, learning a language is,
to me, learning a language is
for me,
me,
it's like a deck of playing cards.
deck of playing
Life
cards.
takes down on the
Like
table.
face down on table.
As you start learning,
As you start learning,
understanding,
understanding,
cards start opening up for you.
cards start opening up for you.
Now, there's
Now,
no standard
there's no
way
standard
of classifying this,
way of
but as you learn,
classifying
you
this.
reach certain milestones.
As you learn, you reach certain milestones.
No standard way of classifying this, but as you learn, you reach certain milestones.
Which is certain You reach certain milestones. As you learn, you reach certain milestones. As you learn, you reach certain milestone. You reach certain milestones. There's no standard way of classifying this. As you learn, you reach certain milestones.
And the first one would be when about 25% of the, but as you learn, you reach certain milestones.
And the first
One would be when about 25% of the cards are turned up, you
when
reach
about 25% of the cars are turned up, and first one would be you reach certain milestones, and first one would be when about 25% of the cars are turned up,
like a basic level.
you reach like a basic level. You reach like a basic level, basic level, basic level, base, basic, 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 base level. You reach like a basic level.
The first one would be when about 25% of the cards are turned up.
When
Certain milestones.
milestones.
And the
And
first one would be when about 25%
25% of the cards are turned up. When about 25% of the cards are turned up. When about 25% of the cards are turned up. And
the
the
first one would be when
about
about
25%
25%
of the cards are turned up. You reach like you reach like a basic level. You reach like a basic level. You reach like a when about 25% of the cards are turned up. You reach like a basic level.
The first one would be when about 25% of the cards are turned up.
You reach like a basic level. And this level, you have base vocabulary, some grammar,
Have a base vocabulary, some grammar, and you're able to
and you're able
have
to
maybe very simple conversations and
very
communicate
simple
a little bit.
conversation and
Able to have
maybe
maybe
very
very
simple
simple conversations
conversation.
and communicate a little bit.
Have maybe very simple communications
You're able to have maybe very simple conversations and communicate a little bit.
and communicate a little bit. Have you able to have maybe you able to have you able to have you able to have you able to have maybe very simple conversations and communicate a little bit. Communicate a little bit. Communicate a little bit. Communicate a little bit. You able to have maybe very simple conversation and communicate a little bit.
And
And
your study goes on.
and your study goes
Until
on,
you
and your study goes on, your study goes on, your exercise goes on, your practice goes on,
reach this magical point up, and
your
your study goes on until you reach this magical point of fluency, what we call
your magical point, this magical point of fluency, this magical point of fluency, this magical point of perfect, this this perfection, this magical point of fluency. Yeah. Your study goes on until you reach this magical point of fluency.
fluent. It goes on. Auditions and communicate a little bit,
Okay.
and your study goes
Goes
on
on
until you reach this magical point of fluency. What
until
we
you
call
reach this magical point of fluency.
your
Your
study
study
goes on
until
you
you
reach this
magical point of
fluency.
fluency.
Fluent in a language. Now,
What we call being fluent in a language. What we call this magical point of fluency. What we call being fluent in a language. What we call being fluent. What we call being fluent in a language. What we call being fluent in a language.
until you reach this magical
Magical
point of fluency, what we call being fluent in a language.
What we call being fluent in the language.
Now, what does this mean? Being
What does
fluent
this mean? What does 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 this mean?
in a language, fluency, what we call being fluent in a language. Now, what does this mean?
What does
Being
this
fluent
mean?
in
What does this mean? 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 What does this mean?
a language of fluency, what we call being fluent in a language. Now, what does this mean?
What does this
Being
mean?
fluent in
What does this mean? 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 What does this mean?
a point of fluency, what we call being fluent in a language. Now, what does this mean?
What does it
being
mean?
fluent in a language, it means that you
Being fluent in a language. It means that being fluent in a language. It means that being fluent in a language. Being perfect in a language. What it means that
you've being fluent in a language.
Language.
Now, what does this
Mean.
mean? Being fluent in a language, it means that you've turned up more than 50% of the cards in the deck.
it means that you turned up you turned up
Fluent in a language, it means that you've turned up more than 50% of the cards in the deck.
more than 50% of the cards in the deck. More than 50% of the cards on the deck. More than 50% of the cards in the deck.
And it means that you've
you
turned up
turned
more
up
than
more than
50% of the cards in the deck,
of the cards in the deck, it means that you've turned up, you've turned up, you have turned up, you've turned up, you've turned up. It means that you turned up more than 50% of the cards in the deck. Being fluency in the language, it means that you've turned up more than 50% of the cards in the deck. Your study goes on until you reach this magical point of fluency. For what we call being what we call being fluent in a language. What we call being fluent in a language.
some grammar, and you're able. At this level, you have
At this level, you have
vocabulary,
speech vocabulary, some
and you're
grammar.
able to
You able to.
make very simple conversation.
You able to. You able to.
Some grammar, and you're able to.
You are able to. You are able to. You are able to. You are able to. You are able to. You are able to have maybe
Have maybe very simple conversations and communicate a little bit.
and
And
you have maybe very simple conversations and communicate a little bit. And
your
your
study goes on
you
until you reach this
until you
magical
reach
point of
this magical
fluency,
point of
what we call
fluency,
being
what
fluent
we
in
call
a
being
language.
fluent in language.
Now, what does this mean?
What does
Being
it mean?
fluent in a
Being
language
fluent is in language. It means that
turned up more than
okay. Your study goes on until you reach this magical point of the fluency. What we call being fluent in the language. What does it mean? Being fluent in a language, it means that you've turned up more than 50% of the cards in the deck. Cards in the deck.
language. Now, what does this mean? Being fluent in a language, it means that you've turned up more than 50% of the cards in the deck,
More than 50% of the cards in the deck.
and that is the point where where the language becomes part of your subconscious.
Uh,
That is the point
That is the
where
point.
you have cards in the deck, and that is the point
that is the
where
point.
you have
When you have
where the language becomes
the
part of your
where the
subconscious.
language becomes part of your subconscious. That is the point. That is the point. That is the point. That is the point where you have that is the point where you have where the language that is the point where the language becomes part of your subconscious, part of your subconscious. Where the language becomes part of your subconscious.
You turned up more than 50% of the cards in the deck, and that is the point
That is the
where
point
you
have
where the language
where the language becomes part of your
subconscious,
subconscious.
so that even if you don't
And
use it anymore for 10 years or
And that and
language becomes
it's
part of your subconscious, so that even if you don't use it anymore for 10 years or longer, you will not forget it. You can get
you can
back into it within a very, very short time.
So that even if you don't use it anymore for 10 years or longer, you will not forget it. You will not forget it. If you don't use it anymore for 10 years or longer, you will not forget it. And you can get back into it within a very, very short time. You can get back into it. You can get back into it. You can get back into it within a very, very short time. You will not forget it. You can get back into it within a very, very short time. Within a very, very short time. Within a very, very short time. You can get back into it within a very, very short time. So then even if you don't use it anymore, so that even if you don't use it anymore, for 10 years or longer, you will not forget it. You can get back into it within a very, very short time.
So,
So
this is a level
a
where
level where
you're comfortable thinking
you're
in a language,
comfortable thinking in a language
comfortable communicating
and
in a language.
and comfortable communicating in a language. So this
Comfortable thinking in a language. This is
this is
a level where
this is a level where this is a level where this is a level where this is a level where this is a level where
you're comfortable thinking in the language,
This is a level where you're comfortable thinking a language and comfortable communicating a language.
and comfortable communicating in the language.
Comfortable communicating in a language.
Now,
Now,
some people go
some
on
people
and,
go on,
you know,
and,
reach
you
like
know,
a mastery level by that time.
reach like a master level, mastery level, master level, reach like a master level.
Now, some people go on and
So some people go on, some people go on, some people go on, nobody go on, some people go on, everybody go on, some people go on, and
comfortable
comfortable
communicating in the
communicating
language.
language.
Now,
Now,
some people go on and,
and
you know, reach
you
like
know,
a mastery level by that time.
you know, reach like a and reach like a and you know reach like a mastery level
You know, classic literature in the other language. Go on and,
and
you know,
reach
reach like a
like a
mastery
mastery
level
level
by that time. You know, classic literature in the
by
other
the time by the time by the time by the time you know class literature
on and, you know, reach like a mastery level by that time. You know, classic
you
literature in the other language and have
you know classical literature in the other language you know classical literature in the other language classical literature in the other language classical literature in the other language 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 classical literature in the other language you know classical literature in the other language by the time you know in classical by the time you know classical literature in the other language by the time you know classical literature in the other language by the time you know classical language in another language you know classical literature in the other language in the other language in the other language classical literature classic
you know, reach like a mastery level by that time. You
you
know,
know
classic literature in the other language and have
classical
maybe in-depth
literature
knowledge of specialized. That time, you know, classic literature in the
classic
other
literature classic literature classic literature classic literature in the other language you know classic literature in the other language
language and have maybe an in-depth knowledge of specialized
and
fields.
have maybe in-depth knowledge of specialized fields of specialized fields
And you know, classic literature in the other language and have maybe an in-depth knowledge of specialized fields.
have in-depth knowledge of specialized fields in-depth knowledge of specialized fields in-depth knowledge of specialized science specialized engineering skill
Classic literature in the other language and have maybe an in-depth knowledge of specialized fields.
have in-depth knowledge have in-depth knowledge have maybe in-depth knowledge have maybe in-depth knowledge of specialized fields
Literature in the other language and have maybe an in-depth knowledge of specialized
have maybe
fields.
in-depth knowledge of specialized fields
Literature in the other language and have maybe an in-depth knowledge of specialized fields.
have maybe in-depth knowledge of specialized fields
That's often the point taken in academia.
and that's often the point that's
In in-depth knowledge of specialized fields. That's often the point taken in academia.
that's often the point taken in academia taken in academia often the point taken in academia that's often the point taken in academia
Knowledge of specialized
specialized
fields.
fields
That's often the point taken in academia.
that's often the point taken in academia
For me, when I learned my first foreign language,
for me when I learned my first language my first
taken in academia.
language
For me, when I learned my first foreign language,
my first foreign language, my first foreign language, foreign language, foreign language, my first foreign language. When I learned my first foreign language,
I had a head start.
I had a head start. I had head start. I had head start. Head start. Head start. Head start. I had a head. I had a head start. Because
Well, I was born to a German-speaking mother.
I was born to German-speaking mother. I was born to German-speaking mother, Korean-speaking mother, Korean-speaking father. I was born to Korean-speaking father, English-speaking mother.
and an American father.
and an American father, and an American, and an American, and an American father.
Oh, I was born to a German-speaking
German
mother
mother
and an American father.
and an American father. I was born to German-speaking mother and an American father. German-speaking mother and an American father. German-speaking mother and Korean father and a Korean father. Korean-speaking mother and an American father. 네, 오늘도 열심히 따라해봤습니다. 영상 시간은 6분이고요. 6분 10초 정도 했고요. 네, 지금 시간 30분 정도 연습을 했습니다. 뭐 영상에서 시간을 점점 이렇게 늘려가고 있긴 한데 많이 늘지는 않았지만은 그 앞에 부분을 계속 반복을 함으로써 점점 퍼펙트 센텐스가 되는 것 같습니다. 좀 더 쉬워지고 머릿속에서 그게 점점점 외워지는 것을 느끼고 또 발음에 있어서도 처음에는 자막을 봐야지 알아들었던 것을 이제 듣고 나서 알아듣고 좀 더 미묘한 발음들 좀 더 미묘한 pronunciation을 좀 따라할 수 있는 그렇게 되고 있는 것 같습니다. 네, 오늘 설날 수고 많았습니다. 네, 내일도 열심히 해보겠습니다. 감사합니다.